Hey, badass black girls, and they making big moves. Hey, badass black girls, nothing that you can't do. They are the future, I'm trying to tell ya. They want the best, no time to settle. They got the strength to handle the pressure. These are the queens, nobody better. Yeah, changing the narrative, that is imperative. They about to rock this. Tell the women that you got this. Got no time for people who are toxic. It's all love, good vibes. You know I got your back, girl. Talking issues that matter. This is badass black girl, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Badass Black Girl. And of course, today we have another Badass Black Girl with us. Her name is Mia Birdsong. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. And here we go.
All right. I'm Mia. I feel like how I introduce myself changes all the time. I think the most important thing about me, which is not about my career, is that I'm someone who loves being in relationship with my family, with my friends, with my community, with my non-human relations, and my orientation and purpose is really about our collective liberation. And I will say I prioritize Black women in that like we are at the heart of it. And fundamentally, I know that when we get free, it helps everybody else get free. And when everybody else gets free, it helps us get free. So that's how I'm going to introduce myself today.
Thank you so much, Mia. And you had a new book come out last year in June of 2020, sorry, when we were in the middle, in the start of the pandemic, but kind of realizing, oh my God, we're stuck at home. How long is that going to last? And I think that a book like yours, How We Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community, resonated so much with so many of us, because that's the time where we're starting to really think about the meaning of many of those things.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the book. And beautiful book. Thank you so much for writing it.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this idea of reclaiming family, friendship, and community.
Yeah, I mean, so human beings are social animals. We need connection and relationship and belonging the same way that we need food and shelter. And in fact, I would say we actually need them more, because the way that we actually access things like food and shelter is with other people. I did not build my house. I don't grow all my own food. None of us does that. I mean, there are like a handful of people who do, but like those people are exceptions, and not all, and we couldn't sustain ourselves if we all tried to live that way. So we actually need relationship and connection. Like it's a primary need for us. So, but we live, or I live, right, in the United States. And the dominant culture in the United States really emphasizes individualism, being self-made, this idea that happiness and success is something that you're supposed to like create for yourself and get to alone, and that if you need help or support, that's like a weakness in some way. And that's really antithetical to who we are. America really loves to talk about independence. We are fundamentally interdependent creatures. So a lot of what this book was about for me were these questions that I was asking myself about success and happiness, and this tension that I felt between, kind of what I grew up being told, which was actually in contradiction to a lot of what I experienced. But then as I got older, I was aware of this longing that I had to really be in deep, connected community where I could show up fully and be vulnerable and be a whole person. and that was, as I became more successful, I felt more pressure to hide the parts of myself that were messy, to act as if I knew everything, to present a version of myself that was aligned with, kind of America's, I mean, a different version because I'm a Black woman, but like aligned with America's version of what success looks like. And in that tension, I started asking a lot of questions about like, what is this? Even as my like kind of political growth and education was happening, like, and I rejected large parts of, kind of the American narrative about success and happiness. I still was, had been socialized with this idea of individualism and that asking for help is weakness, and I needed to do. I mean, I feel like the trope of the strong Black woman is like our trap, like our version of the narrative America presents to us about like what it means to be a success, right? Like that we can tolerate anything, that we are badasses, that if you want something done right, you ask a Black woman. I feel like there are all of these things that we get rewarded for as Black women that are really just part of white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism. So the reclaiming part, which was what your question was about, was a recognition that even though in our time the creation of family and friendship and community might look different, it was not new. That what we've been kind of told is a traditional family is really just a convention, and is like the insular nuclear family, right, is not actually how humans do family. There is the like cliche about how it takes a village to raise children, and like it's true. Like two people, not enough to raise kids. Two people is not enough for the child or for the parents, if you happen to have two parents and raising children. So for me, a lot of it was about like how do we return to some part of understanding who we are as people that recognizes the ways in which we do family and community and friendship that are expansive and inclusive and just include more people, right? And certainly in our idea of family. Yeah, so that's what I mean by reclaiming. Like it's like this is the thing that, and it's not about, like I said, it's not about going back to some version that existed 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago, but that it's a reclamation of like our interdependence and a recognition that in our modern existence, we need to, if we're going to survive, and certainly like I feel like the last however many months it's been, which it really feels like 900 years of pandemic has taught us, is like like the systems that exist, the institutions, like they've been failing a lot of people, but like a lot more people got to see how inadequate those systems are for actually supporting us. And I know for me, the way that I've been getting through the pandemic is my community and my like the people I've chosen as kin, not the government, not medical institutions, not businesses, right? I mean, they're there and I'm using pieces of what they have to offer, but what I've been most sustained by and what has created any semblance of security or safety or comfort for me has come from the people that I choose to be in community with.
I'm curious about how people react when you talk about that need for connection, to connect with family members, to connect with the community. And when you explain to them how a system based around that connection is definitely working better than one of individualism, where the needs of others are not taken into account.
Right.
When you talk about those things, how do people usually react?
Usually what they recognize, either it's an affirmation of something that they have been doing or have been trying to create in their lives, or it is a relief, right? It is like something that they have been trying to figure out or have been searching for and they didn't know what it was. And then they're like, oh, like, so I feel like there's in either case, there's a recognition, right? That like, that is that resonates and that it's true. That being said, like, I'm not talking to people who are like vehemently, like opposed to the idea of like asking for help or needing other people, or who, I'm not talking to people who believe that freedom is like, I don't have to wear a mask and like screw everybody else, right? Like, that's not the people that I'm having conversations with. Yeah, I think most people just, there's some recognition and resonance that people find when I start talking about it.
That reclaiming,
Mm-hmm.
what does it look like in the average Joe's regular everyday life? If I'm working on reclaiming those things, family, community, friendship, how does it look like? What are some things that I can do every day to get there?
So I don't know what it looks like. I feel like part of what I found in doing the research for the book, and part of what shows up in the book, is that it looks like a million things. My disclaimer is that this book is not a how-to book. It really is. I wanted to find stories that gave us just like a bunch of examples of what's possible, not because we're necessarily going to follow those examples, but because they open our thinking up and our feeling up to like that there are other ways to do things. So that's largely what I was trying to do. So let me just like make that disclaimer. I think the place that, and I get asked this question all the time, of course. So I think the place that we all start, there are two things. One, I think, is to check in with yourself about where the longing you're feeling, like what it's from, and try to understand like what would satisfy that. And I talk about in the book, I talk about like we all long to be known, right? To be seen as whole people. And that means not just for, how awesome we are and how well we do things and when we're good, but like we also have a desire, and there's a tension in this desire because we're also terrified of this, but we also have a desire to actually be seen. And by that, I mean like accepted and loved and cared for all the ways in which we feel like, we're a hot mess. So that's one longing that we have. Another is that we long to give and receive help and support. We are nourished and filled when we are able to be of service to people that we care about. And then we're just like actually supported and cared for, and like our well-being is protected when the people that we love care for us and support us and help us. So that's another longing that we have. And I think in the pandemic, that is one of the things that really surfaced for a lot of people, is like wanting to know how to just like show up for their friends and their family. And also like the times that we were either logistically tapped out or emotionally like just like stretched, like needing people to show up for us. And then the other piece is about freedom and accountability. And this is a little more complicated, and because those words mean something kind of conventionally that is not necessarily what I mean. So in America, the story about freedom aligns with the American dream. It's about individuals. It is about independence. It is this idea that we get to do whatever the hell we want, and we don't have restrictions on us, and no one is telling us what to do. And that is a very post like 1500s Hobbesian idea of what freedom means. really is about the individual not being confined and being able to like keep all their stuff and not be worried about like other people taking their things. And it's about dominion over like property and land. It's a very Western male capitalist idea of freedom. So freedom used to mean something else to people. And I think this is, again, like I think of this as a fundamental meaning of freedom. So there's a piece of it that's been carried forward, which is that if you're enslaved, right, you're not free. But what enslavement meant, and this is pre-American slavery, like that's a whole other animal. But what enslavement meant was that you were separate from your kin. Being enslaved meant being away from your loved ones and your family and your community. Because being with people was how you were free. Being in community with other people is how you're free. And that idea of freedom is so different from the kind of dominant American idea of freedom. So I think it's important for me to articulate that. So part of what we are looking for, right, as human, part of what we're longing for is to be in relationship with people so that all of our needs and our well-being is met. Because that's part of how we're free, right? Like if I have to constantly struggle in order to, get medical care or house myself or be fed, like that's not liberation, right? Like our needs being met is part of what liberation means. There's a piece of it that is about like not having undue restrictions put on us, like, not being told what we can do with our bodies to some extent. And we can go down a whole rabbit hole with like vaccinations versus abortion, but we're not gonna do that right now. Being able to like express yourself, being able to like, show up as yourself, right? Like I think about what it means for Black folks to be able to show up fully, for queer folks to be able to show up fully, for gender nonconforming and trans folks to be able to show up fully, right? Being your whole self is part of that. So there's some tensions in there, but I feel like part of the fundamental understanding I want people to have is that you can't actually be free by yourself. Freedom is something that we achieve with each other. And then the accountability piece, right? Accountability for many of us is often, we have it wrapped up with the idea of punishment. But how I'm thinking about accountability is an alignment with your values and your integrity, right? It is also how we be, again, in community with each other, because we all harm people and we all experience harm. And accountability is how we recognize that the harm that we've caused, and it's how we repair any of the damage that's been done because we caused that harm. And that's how our relationships stay healthy, right? Like we, are a jerk to our best friend, and like we need to apologize, or we show up late to something, and like we accountability is about like owning our mistakes and then like doing repair when we can. That's simplification, but I think that understanding accountability is part of something that we want, because we want to make amends when we've harmed people, and we certainly want people to make amends with us when we've been harmed. So all that to say, I know it's a very long answer to your question, but I think understanding those longings that we have, seeing others and being seen, receiving and providing help and support, freedom and accountability, help us understand what it is we're looking for when it comes to community, because we may have some of those things in some places and like not have them in other places. So when I think about what it means, what we then, like once we've identified those things for ourselves, I think then it's like you start to have conversations with the people that you're in relationship with. That might mean that you have a friend who you'd like to bring a little closer into the interior of your life, or be more closer into the interior of their life. And I think we can actually like have explicit conversations about this. I know a bunch of folks who have read my book have then given it to, their friends or their family so that they can have these conversations. And I think I'm sorry, now the construction has started and it's really loud. But I think having the conversations is like the first thing you do. And those can be awkward and strange, but I think you can say, I've been thinking about what I need in terms of relationship in my life. And I'd love to talk with you about like what you might need and like things that you might want and how our relationship might be deeper or closer in ways that are supportive for both of us. The other thing that certainly I've done is like pulled together just like groups of people because we need to, or with the intent of like working on some piece of ourselves together. So in the book, I talk about Black Women's Freedom Circle that my friend Amaka and I started. And for us, that was really about like, what is the internal work that we need to do as Black women to excavate, you know, our internalized racism and sexism and kind of capitalism. Like, what are the things that we need to do? And it was a recognition that while there is work that we do as individuals, there is some work that we can only do as collectives. And that space, which we created like 4 years ago, is just like, it's extraordinary. Like it has gone through like, I mean, the ways in which we are closer, like the ways in which we figured out how to show up for each other during the pandemic, the place of refuge that's been for us. Like as the pandemic started and we were all freaking out, like we already had a group of people we could like go to and talk to about all that stuff. You know, one of the things that I also talk about this in the book that I do because I work at home and I am very much an only child, I can lose track of my people. So I have a Post-it note where I write down, I have the names of like, I don't know, a dozen folks who, not people I live with, because I definitely see them all the time, but a dozen people who I might not like regularly encounter in my life if I'm just like going about my business. And for me, that's just a way to remind me to like, oh, like I haven't talked to Amber for a little while, like I should check in with her. I remember when I did it, I kind of felt like an asshole, but I figured better feel like an asshole and like behave like a good friend than like just forget people and like actually be an asshole to them. So that's one of the things that I do. And I think that there's this like, it's not about like, oh, if you don't make my list, like then I don't care about you, but it really is about recognizing that our time and our energy is a limited resource, and we want to be spending it in the ways that are generative and that make sense to us and that are inspiring to us. So for me, it was about like being really clear with myself about like, who is it that I want to be spending my time and energy on, not just who shows up and takes up my time and energy. And that's some of the intention that I feel like is necessary in order to kind of sustain and build these relationships and tend to them.
I was thinking about myself as a young girl growing up in Haiti, where family is so important. I tell friends all the time that in the Caribbean, the idea of putting our elderly in a home where they're isolated and away from the family is unthinkable. But growing up in Haiti, while I learned to value family, I was also very annoyed by what it meant to be very close to your family members, very close to your friends, because it's very difficult to be an individual. So when I moved to the US, it was kind of eye-opening. It's like, it's all about you and what you want to be, and you can be everything until you realize, of course, it's a lie too. And I've been working on finding the middle ground, right? Where you're able to kind of have a life that is your own in terms of your life mission, and at the same time not underestimating the value of those friendships of family. And I'm wondering, I'm an educator, so I interact a lot with kids and their parents, and I'm wondering if you have any insight on what educators can do so that kids realize the importance of their community, of staying connected with their family and their friends, because it's so easy for them to just be focusing on their in themselves as individuals.
Totally.
That's the kind of society we live in America.
I think that there's something about I mean, I can think of a few things. One would be having kids identify, right? Like all the people in their lives, that known and unknown, that allow them to live their lives. So for example, I could see a focus on food, right? They have somebody in their home who, feeds, cooks food, puts it on the table, does grocery shopping, like things like that. But then there are the people who are like, in the place where they get their food. So if it's a grocery store, it's going to be like the people who work in the grocery store. If it's a farmer's market, it's like those folks. And then there's the people who transport the food from wherever it is grown or packaged to wherever they get it, right? And then there are the people who ultimately, like, grow or produce or create the chemicals or whatever to, like, to make the food happen to exist, and then harvest it if it's grown food. And I think tracing that line from like the people who are in their household who they know, or even like, if there's a restaurant that their family likes to order from and they, see the same people who work there or whatever. So there's tracing that line and seeing how many people are actually involved in you eating that like chicken leg or carrot, right? And then asking about like, well, how could you, like, the people who are in your household, like, how could you get to know like people a little, like a circle out? What would that mean? How could you understand more if you can't get to know, all the people who grow the food or harvest it, but like, how could you understand more about their lives? And potentially do things that would benefit them. So I think about like, migrant farm workers and the conditions they live in, or the labor laws that they're contending with, and what it might look like for a group of kids to identify, right, like the actual place where the pistachios or carrots that they eat come from, and see like what, like, are those folks organizing in any way? Are there labor laws that would benefit them they would like to have passed? Like those kinds of things, to bring them in closer to them, so that they're, it's like you've got, auntie or grandma or dad or whatever who actually does the grocery shopping and cooks your food, but there are also these other people who absolutely are essential to you being able to eat. So how do you show up for those people the same way that like you're in relationship with your, with your parents or your grandparents or whoever, your guardians? So that's one thing I think about. I mean, I think the other thing would be to have kids explore, like, who do they think of as like the people who are closest to them? So other children that they're close to, like their teachers, their biological or legal or chosen family, depending on how their family does family. And then I think that it's also about kids hearing stories about all the ways that family and community can happen, and understanding that like chosen family is a totally legitimate, amazing thing, and that we all live in a community, and knowing the people in your community is part of how you create safety. It's part of how you make sure that like policies and practices that are supportive to people in your community exist. Like you get, engaged with your neighbors, and you're like vote, or you write letters to the mayor, or you protest or whatever. So really understanding that like that being with and in community is part of how you make sure that the community you live in is the one that you want, right? That it is functioning for all of us. And I think that it is inevitable that the more you understand and care about the people who are around you besides your immediate, kind of household, it's inherently political to like care about people outside of your household. And that's, I think, one of the best ways for young people to start to get a political education and recognize the power and voice that they have when they make what they want, when they pay attention to other people and show up for them, and they're being in solidarity with folks, or they're organizing and making their voices heard. But like, this is how we actually make the kinds of changes that we need in the world, is in community. Like, you don't do that stuff by yourself, right? I don't decide that I would like the air to be clear and I go and, talk to the government or the, heads of whoever is polluting the air, and I go tell them that I want them to change. Like, that's not how that works. You have to do it with other people. So you have to be in solidarity with folks. You have to be organized with other folks and be in community.
And speaking of children, I'm very curious about how you became who you are. Tell us a little bit about things maybe in your childhood that led you to becoming an activist, to writing books about topics of importance. Tell us a little bit about young Mia.
Oh, young Mia. So I think one thing is that both of my parents, my dad was a writer, my mom is a writer. They both, when I was growing up, cared a lot about language and grammar and being able to access ideas through the written word and to share ideas through the written word. Neither of them was as politically radical like when I was a child as I am now, but I think that care of language transferred to me. My father was very, my father liked to hold court. He could, I remember when I was really little, I don't know, I was like 4 or 5. Maybe I was 7. Anyway, we were walking down the street. He lived in Boston, and we were walking down the street, and some other man, they passed each other. He starts talking to this guy, and they're chatting for a little while. He's, introduces me because I was visiting him, and tells the guy a little bit about me and whatever. And then we go on, and I was like, "Who is that?" And my dad was like, "I don't know." And I was just like, "What?" I think maybe we were in the hardware store. I can't remember, but I just remember assuming that this was someone that my father knew. But he didn't. He was a stranger, or maybe it was somebody he'd seen before, but definitely didn't know his name. It wasn't close to him. And that, my dad was also a professor and a photographer, and there was a way in which he just invited people in and interacted with them that allowed people to be comfortable, allowed them to reveal themselves, and inevitably made them laugh, because my dad was also very funny. So I feel like I inherited that from him. I remember when my dad died, we had 2 memorials. There was one at Texas Southern University where he taught, and then there was another one at his church. And the one that was at his church, I talked in the beginning, and I remember there was this line afterward. There was this line of hundreds of people who wanted to just, say a few words to me about my dad. And so many of them who I'd never met before, right? And they'd seen me for I don't know, 5 minutes on stage talking about him. And they were just like, "You are exactly like your father." The way that I just I love public speaking. I love holding court. I love asking people questions about themselves and getting to hear their stories. And that thing, I love to talk, but I also really love to learn and hear from people. I got that from my dad in that outgoing way, and then from my mom, her curiosity, her desire to understand things. She's definitely much more of an introvert, but I got that from both of them. And then I think that I was talking to a friend about this morning, who is also mixed. So my dad was this Black man from Jamaica, and my mom was this white woman from the South, and her family, she's an orphan, but her family, the family she had, disowned her when she married my father, because they're racist. So I think that there is this, for many people who are biracial or bicultural or mixed in some way, there is this way in which, certainly as children, we often feel like we don't belong anywhere, and we're always on this bridge. And I think as I've become an adult, I've realized that I belong everywhere that I want to be, and that bridge is actually like the landing point, right? That more of us are drawing our lines to that bridge. That is the thing that reminds us that while we have, and I'm not saying, well, let me not interrupt myself yet, that, you know, we fundamentally, like, we are in relationship with each other, and not just other humans. We're in relationship with the soil, we're in relationship with the redwoods, we're in relationship with the honeybees, we're in relationship with the clouds, we're in a relationship with the mountains. And that like all of us, right, all life came from the ocean, right? Like we are like our existence, right, is like sun and water, and then eventually soil and earth and rock. And that, you know, and when we go back far enough, like we all, like our ancestors are all common. And there's something about that allows me to be reminded that, like, I belong everywhere I want to be, right? And I'm not saying that like we're all the same, like let's ignore all of our differences, because our differences are what make us interesting and awesome, and what I'm like most curious about. But it is recognizing that we're all in relationship with each other, we're all related. But I think that I was like, what question am I answering? I think that start that I had, where I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, made me very aware of what it felt like when I did feel like I belonged somewhere. And that feeling is one that we all want as people, because we need to belong, like, because that's how we know that like we're in a group, right? Like that's how we know we're of some folks who we can like throw our lot in with and like create safety and well-being with. So I think there's something about feeling like I didn't have that allowed me to like track and be curious about what it felt like to be that way. And so much of the work that I do, my non-public work with organizations and institutions and groups of people, is about creating a culture of belonging.
I was wondering if you have more tips on just becoming more active, becoming an activist for young people.
I mean, I think that part of it is yes, I would go back to this idea of like knowing who you are, right? That like seeing what it is that resonates with you, that you can, not that you feel like you're supposed to care about, but that you actually do care about. And knowing yourself enough to know like what your gifts are, so that you're, you know, like if you're not somebody who, if you are like not into crowds, like you're not going to be going to protests. But people who go to protests need signs made, or they need food delivered, or they need, you know, if there's a potential of them getting arrested, they need a buddy who is not going to get arrested, who can like make sure to call the lawyers and check in to make sure that they're okay, and not, you know, make sure that they don't get like lost in the system. So there are like so many roles that we can play when it comes to activism, and some of them are very like public, but there's so much more that happens behind the scenes, that's not just about like who is, you know, in front of a television camera, or who is marching in the protest. Like there's lots of things. So part of it is really about like understanding who we are and what's ours to do, and how we want to show up in that way, in ways that are sustainable. And that, like, you know, certainly like what I really cared about as a teenager has changed some. Like there are other things that I care about more than I did when I was a kid. So, and that's fine. It's fine for your like focus and your activism to change. And then I think it's really important to actually get rigorous about educating ourselves. We end up, when we don't know the history of the movements that we're part of, or the history of like the thing that we are trying to organize to build, or organizing to fight against, we end up making mistakes and repeating things that people have already done, or just like not understanding context enough to be thoughtful or strategic about the work that we're doing. So I actually think it's really important to be rigorous around history, around strategy, understanding like what activism is, and like what things have been effective historically and what things aren't effective. I think that being people who, like, the more people who are holding more of that, and that, let's be clear, like, there's not agreement about all of this stuff. Like, part of it is about being in dialogue with folks and growing around that, but really understanding that there is some rigorous knowledge seeking and understanding that needs to happen to be an activist in a way that I think has integrity. And just also, like, be in the long arc of it, right? Like, hold on, excuse me. This is not, most of the problems that we haven't solved yet are problems that are going to take more than, like, you know, a month of protesting for us to address. Now, when the status quo or the systems, you know, that exist are telling us it's going to take a really, really long time, like we don't need to wait for things. But my point is that, you know, climate change, like, we need to like make some dramatic changes, but like some things are just going to take a long time. So I think if we're overly short-sighted about what it is we're trying to do, then we often end up creating things that we then need to dismantle because the long-term goal is actually in opposition to whatever short-term goal we had. So I think being able to think long-term, which, like, you know, I mean, I still find a little challenging, and definitely was challenging when I was younger. And then I think the other thing I would say, that like movements that are not intergenerational are definitely going to be missing something. I think some of the, you know, some of the mistakes and the smartest strategy and wisdom is going to exist among our elders, and being in relationship with those folks so that we can get perspective, that we can hear about history firsthand, as opposed to like reading about it from something that some journalist wrote, so that we can maintain a sense of longevity around our activism. I feel like there are all these ways in which our elders are so critical to movements that are, you know, largely kind of like led by young people. So I think it's important to just like not leave them out.
Mia, thank you so much for all of your tips, and also for telling us a little bit about who you are, your journey. It was so much fun to learn about your dad too, and
yeah,
his sense of
he's
humor.
amazing.
Thank you for coming by and
Absolutely.
being one of our featured badass Black girls. I don't know if there's anything else you would like to say before we conclude.
I do want to say something. This occurred to me earlier. You know, belonging is such a for Black women, I think we often are in contexts in which we feel like we don't belong, or only like a version of us belongs. And you know, I said earlier that like I've moved to a place in my life where I'm like, oh, I belong everywhere that I want to be. And that doesn't mean that like every space is made for me, but it's that if I want to be someplace, right? Like it's as fun is a more fundamental thing. Like I belong anywhere on this planet. So one of the things that I realized, I work with this amazing somatics practitioner. And in a session with her, I had this realization about like, you know, that feeling that you have when you show up someplace and you feel like you don't fit in. And I had this thought about like how I ground myself, and that really is about just like actually feeling gravity, right? Like recognizing that the earth is holding me all the time. The earth is insisting on me staying here, right? I don't go flying off into space, right? The earth is not like, oh, I'm done with you, and then we go like flying off into space. We are constantly being held by the earth. And I see that gravity as a reminder, right, that I belong here. So if somebody is telling me, or either explicitly or implicitly, that I don't belong someplace, and I can like reconnect to the fact that I am grounded on the planet, right, and the earth is holding me here, then my question to myself is like, am I gonna believe this fool, or am I gonna believe the fucking planet? right? The earth is constantly telling us we belong here, and we need to listen to her because she knows what she's talking about. So if anybody tells us that we don't belong someplace, or they're making us feel like we don't belong someplace, they don't know what they're talking about, because they've been around for like 5 seconds and the earth has been here for like a billion years. I don't really know how long the earth's been here. That's not one of those numbers I hold in my head, but you know what I mean. The earth's been here for hella long, and these people telling you don't belong someplace have been here for 5 minutes. So listen to the earth, not to these fools.
I love this approach. I love it. Thank you so much, Mia, again.
My
Until
pleasure.
next time, I hope you will come back and talk to us a little
Sure.
bit
When I
more.
have something more to talk about, I would love to.
Before we go, any new book in progress? I know
Oh my
that this
God.
one is so recent.
I feel like there's like, back here in my head, there's probably several. But no, I'm not like working on anything. I'm focusing on, like the actual people in my life right now and my community, and not doing a lot of public stuff.
But we'll keep an eye out for anything new,
Thank you.
because we're big fans at Badass Black
Thank you.
Girls. So
Thank
until
you.
next time,
All right. Thanks so much.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.